Greetings, Aimee Spector. Thank you so much for joining us on the Menopause Research and Education Fund series of interviews that we do to keep people informed. And we are talking today about brain fog. And this is something, brains and psychology is your area. You are a professor of psychology. You spent years in dementia looking at that. You developed a tool that is now implemented, I think, in 43 countries, including on the NHS, to help people cope better with the symptoms of dementia. About Alzheimer's. And now you've turned your incredible brain to brain fog. Why? What's made brain fog appealing to you, darling?
Oh, that's a very, very kind way of putting it. So I feel like I've told this story so many times, but for anyone who hasn't heard this, I became really interested in brain fog, having experienced it myself. So, as you say, I've been working in dementia for 28 years now. And about 5 years ago, I was in this, maybe even slightly longer. I get my numbers wrong because of my brain fog. I was in this strange, dark place where my memory was really, really appalling. I was particularly noticing it at work and at times when I was stressed and times when I was trying to multitask and keep lots of things in mind and just having huge memory lapses to the point where I went to my GP a couple of times and I was quite close to being sent off for an assessment for dementia. And 5 years ago, the word brain fog wasn't even being used. So my GP didn't say, oh, could it be brain fog due to perimenopause? No, in fact, no one said that. I didn't tell many people because it's embarrassing, but no one said that. I only realized about 4 years ago that it was something to do with my hormones. And then I think was really surprised that there was such an absence of awareness. And I think that's changed very, very quickly. But I just really felt that I wanted to focus on this area because there's such a lack of support for women.
Absolutely, and it can be so distressing as well. I don't know whether you know, but I know other people have heard me bang on about this before, but my mother had early onset Alzheimer's. So she was diagnosed at 58 and dead by 68. I'm now 62. So when I started to have brain fog as well, I did the same. I went to the GP, and this would probably be, around about 10 years ago, I guess now. And he just looked at me and said, well, it's stress. And that made me feel no better at all, because you do worry, and it is a major source of anxiety. It's a loss of confidence. It's one of those driving reasons why women leave work, because they no longer think that they can do their job anymore. And as you've said before on many occasions, I think it is one of the most prevalent symptoms of brain fog. Brain fog. There you go. That's my brain fog. One of the most prevalent symptoms of menopause, but so little research into it. So what do we actually know about it? What causes it, and what can be done?
Sure. So firstly, I think we're beginning to realize that it's much more prevalent than we thought. So, rewind 5-10 years ago, we always associated menopause with hot flushes and night sweats. Those are the main symptoms that we assumed were menopause related. And without those, we didn't realize that we were necessarily even in perimenopause. Last year, we did a mega survey with the Menopause Mandate Group. So we had around 15,000 women in the UK completing that survey. And we asked them to list to tick all the symptoms that they had. We had a very long list of symptoms, and we found that brain fog was the largest reported symptom. So 86% of women reported brain fog, and that was compared to something like 53% and 54% for hot flushes and night sweats. So and there are various other reports that are coming out. I think we didn't used to even ask people because we didn't associate it, so that's why the data isn't very good. But so firstly, we know that there's a lot of it. I think you said what causes it. We don't know for sure. We think that the hormone fluctuations in perimenopause are largely to do with this. And I think one of the compelling arguments for that is that it seems to be really bad in perimenopause for many people, and it tends to settle down postmenopause when the hormones are also settling down. So in perimenopause,
room on a regular basis and wonder what I came in there for.
Yes. And yeah, so I mean, it doesn't necessarily go away, but that seems to be the peak. And what we know is that the estrogen and progesterone levels in the are going up and down and up and down, and they're all over the place. And that we have estrogen and progesterone receptors in the brain that are really important, particularly in the hippocampus, which is the area that it controls memory. I think some people are just more sensitive to those changes than others. So there's no very, very clear reason why some people we all have hormone fluctuations, but some people are really sensitive to that cognitively. Other people might experience things more in terms of physical sensations or mental health related things. So we all experience these things differently. But I also think that apologize for the psychological terms, but menopause is what we call a biopsychosocial experience. So there are biological things happening. There are changes in the hormone levels and therefore in the brain, but there's a lot of psychological and social things going on as well that can really exacerbate symptoms. So if someone like me, I can use myself as a case example, knows that when I go into a meeting at work, there's a chance that I might forget everyone's name. The anxiety about that is probably makes me more likely to forget names. So, or when I'm at an event and I have to introduce people to each other, that's my big anxious thing. So I just think, oh, I'm going to forget everyone's name. And just the worry about that happening makes it worse. So often the symptoms might be quite subjective. We don't even necessarily pick them up on tests, on objective tests. They're quite subtle, but they cause so much anxiety and distress that often that exacerbates them and leads to changes in in what people do. So you can see how people would just think, well, maybe I just won't go to that meeting anymore because it's just too stressful. And then they stop going to those meetings, and then they're less likely to be promoted, or so it can have an impact, an ongoing impact.
Exactly. And you mentioned there that it's difficult to pick up on tests. And I remember having heard people saying, who's Brian? I'm going, no one knows who Brian is. I had corrected this. But anyway, obviously it didn't correct on all platforms. That it's difficult to pick up on tests. Now, I remember having a conversation once with a neurologist, and she was saying, we were talking about brain fog, and we were talking about baby brain and things like that. And she's saying, the standardized tests show that there really is, that these things almost don't exist. So how, because it's one thing to say, oh, well, I gave people a list of words, and then afterwards I gave them a treatment, I gave them another list of words, and the number of words they recalled was the same. But brain fog is such a different thing. It's that literally you had a thought in your mind and then it just floated away. Well, that's what it's like. How on earth do you measure it and see whether anything does actually make a difference to it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I also think it fluctuates, doesn't it? So you might have times of the day where it's particularly bad. Mine's always bad first thing in the morning, times of the menstrual cycle, if you're having a menstrual cycle. So you might do some tests on a person at the right time and everything might look great, and it might not look so bad later. I think you're right. And I think most of the test batteries that we've got have been developed to pick up early dementia and sort of more significant neurological impairments. So they're not sensitive enough to pick up these very small changes. What we do know is about 1 in 10 women, you do see some changes on these tests, what we call they become clinically significant. So Pauline Mackey in the States has done a lot of work on this. So there is a subgroup, and 1 in 10 is a lot of women. That's like 1 in 20 of the population where you will actually see these changes. But you're right. For a lot of people, it's much more subjective than objective. You can one day just forget the names of people, but then score fine on these tests. So what we think is really important is asking their subjective opinion of brain fog. So we've actually developed a measure of that. It's called the MenoCog, which is a self-reported measure. And some may say, well, is that as relevant? I think it is. I mean, if you think about things like depression, anxiety, quality of life, all these things we ask people subjectively, because it's so hard for many of these things to actually measure them in a purely objective way. So we have to, and subjective impressions of all these constructs correlate very closely to things like burnout, stress, ability to work, ability to stay in the job, etc. So I think subjectively is more important.
Yeah, we've got a question over here from LinkedIn saying, "Are you saying that it's physical and psychological?" You were talking about the different types. You know, some symptoms were physical and some were psychological. That's what you were talking. Not necessarily that brain fog has had a physical.
Yes, yes, exactly. That I think we it's a bit like, I liken it sometimes to the hormone fluctuations we have as the teenagers have, where some will get lots of physical pain, some will be very grumpy, for some it will really affect their sleep, without simplifying it too much, that we all have hormone fluctuations, we all have neurological processes and things going on in their body, and hormones and things going around, and we all react slightly differently. And for some, I think that the brain fog is really problematic, but not for everybody.
Yeah. Now, going back to your research there, so you've been working very, very hard on adapting the tool that you developed for dementia to menopause and to brain fog. So what is the tool and what have you been doing?
So I created something called cognitive stimulation therapy for dementia for my PhD. This is many years ago. In 1998 we started that work, so nearly 30 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, makes me very old. And so the dementia treatment is a small group treatment which aims to improve cognitive skills and quality of life. And as you mentioned at the beginning, it's because it's so effective and cost effective, it's now the main non-drug treatment in the NHS, and it's also used in 43 countries. So I spent most of my career working on that. And then I kind of thought, when I had this brain fog and I went to the doctor and said, what can I do? And she said, I don't know, but there's no treatment, or maybe it'll get better, or you could try antidepressants and all the things you don't want to hear. And when I looked at the literature and I talked to other people, I realized there was nothing there that showed that there are no kind of evidence-based implemented treatments for brain fog. We have no clear guidance. Some people will claim that certain supplements work, but it hasn't been broadly demonstrated. So I thought, let's develop something, and also develop something that's accessible for people who either can't take HRT, don't want to take HRT, or for people who are on HRT but still have brain fog, which
Yes.
we know is many people. So what we did was we thought we're going to develop a kind of psychosocial intervention, but we don't really know what it's going to look like. So we started by doing a big survey. I think we had 216 women, and we asked them all. And these were women who had self-diagnosed brain fog. So they, on a measure, they said, I have cognitive problems and they really significantly impact my life. And we asked them what kind of support they'd want. And we broke it down to, would you want something in a group? Would you want something one-to-one? Would you want something, what kind of strategies and aspects would you want within that? So we use that as well as a review of the literature and what we know about interventions to help brain fog, maybe in other populations. And we combine it all together to come up with this 8-hour treatment. So it's divided into 4 sessions. Each one's 2 hours, and they're delivered online in a group by some kind of psychologist or trainee psychologist. And what it does, it's got a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy in it. So a lot of getting people to think about the cognitive problems and how it impacts them, and to challenge some of their negative thoughts. It's also
Just let me add this, because I know that there's a lot of resistance to cognitive behavioural therapy.
Yes.
Because people get very confused and think that basically you're saying to them the problem's in your head. But so just explain to people what the difference between psychotherapy and cognitive behavioural therapy.
Yeah, so cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't, and I know that there was a lot of concern when it was recommended in the NICE guidelines as an alternative or in addition to HRT. And I totally understand why people thought that, because I think people thought it was saying, well, that, it's all in our head and we can talk ourselves out of it. Now, we know that CBT can really help with hot flushes and night sweats, but it doesn't get rid of them. But what it does is it can change the way that people feel about them, and therefore the impact it has on their lives. So, and it's the same with brain fog. So what we found actually in our studies is that there are lots of people coming along who are on HRT but still have brain fog, and we can't necessarily totally get rid of that, but we can change the way that people feel and respond when these things happen, just to get them through those years when they're going to have it. So rather than think I'm just not going to go to work, or I'm just going to back out of that because it's so embarrassing and everyone's going to think I'm awful, you kind of challenge that and think about alternative ways. Like what are the alternative ways we could address that so what could you do differently, what could you say, how could you respond? And we tried to develop what we call kind of positive cycles rather than negatives. Rather than spiraling negatively and going off and ending up leaving work, it's really getting people to address that. And actually in a small group we find that's really helpful as well, because there's a lot of peer support and sharing ideas. So that we find really helpful. Another thing that we do in CST Meno, I didn't say it's called CST Meno, by the way, the treatment. Another thing we do is teach people very specific strategies. So what we know with a lot of brain fog, it's about divided attention and poor attention, doing too many things. And also we know that if our brain's a bit compromised, sort of divided attention is even more difficult. So we get people to learn, we teach people ways of really focusing on things and to help them remember stuff. And there's also a bit of education about lifestyle and the brain and a bit of peer support. So it's all integrated into the programme.
Which is very, very useful. And the in terms of where you're at with it now, or what do you in the studies that you've done? So you started off with the survey to find the problem. You've done the studies. What have you found so far in the preliminary research that you've done as to how much you can actually help people?
So we've only tested it on 33 people because we've done what's called a feasibility study. So in feasibility studies, you're really looking at, it's almost like proof of concept. Can you set up a randomized controlled trial? Can you recruit people? Do people actually want to take part? Will they come to the groups? Will they stay in all the sessions? Will they complete your outcome measures? And will they give you some feedback that indicates that you're going in the right direction? We don't ever, or very rarely, find any significant changes in outcomes. So we didn't find any significant changes in outcomes, but with such small numbers, it's really hard to see those changes. What we did find is, firstly, there was a huge demand. So we had about 200 people wanting to take part within a month. It was unbelievable how quick, and we only advertised on social media. So we had loads of people who wanted to do it. I think I'm trying to remember the exact percentage, but I think about 63% of the sample were on HRT. So this is people on HRT who need additional support. So and I'm very pro HRT. If you can take it and want to take it and it suits you, I can't take it. So this isn't instead of, it's I suppose the point is people may need both.
Yes, absolutely.
So we need additional things. It's not, so those people were on HRT but saying that they were still struggling. We found that people turned up to a good number of sessions, they completed the outcomes, and we got some really good qualitative feedback. So including someone saying that her boss had noticed a difference at work and she felt like she really nailed it, having been at the stage where she might be leaving work. But what we really need to do now is what we call a full randomized controlled trial, where we really, in order to really understand whether it's effective in terms of improving cognition and also other symptoms, and also whether it's cost effective. So we want to understand whether rolling this out, and we're thinking particularly in the workplace, but it could also be through the NHS and primary care, is that likely to keep people working, to keep people mentally active, to stop people from leaving work or withdrawing and then having other mental health challenges? So that's something we're looking at as well.
Okay, you've got a couple of questions over here. One is, what about quality of life? Was that improved?
So quality of life we looked at, that was one of our outcome measures. So we used something called the MENQOL, which is menopause specific. Again, we compared people receiving CST Meno with a control group, but there were such small numbers. There were about 16 in each group. So all the outcomes were sort of There was nothing significant, because the thing is also, just from a sort of scientific perspective,
This is qualify the word significant here, because when you're saying significant, you mean statistically significant.
Yes, exactly.
Most of us, when you think, when we're hearing somebody say, "Oh, there's nothing significant about it,"
That's a really good point, isn't it? Yes, and so that's a really good point. So in terms of when we interviewed people, they said we thought it was great. It really, really helped us. But for something to be statistically significant, which is what guidelines look at and things like that, you need hundreds of people, because there's so much individual variation. And even with, I'm coming back to what you're saying at the beginning, even with subjective change that we notice in our lives, like I feel like I can go to work now and I didn't before, that's not always picked up on these tests that we do before and after. So the paper that we published a couple of weeks ago in Reproduction and Fertility, which I think you shared, didn't you? And I've if anyone follows me, they can see I put the paper on there. That just looks at the questionnaire measures, which weren't statistically significant, but the feedback that we got, the qualitative feedback, we're going to be publishing that separately. And that's where you can really see some of the positive things that did come out of CST Meno.
And that is amazing, because the other question here is, it was not really a question, but it's a statement, but it's very, very true, is about the amount of shame that people have when they come here, because it is so hard for women to go to their boss and say, "I'm having difficulty, I can't remember, I can't do this." There's embarrassment, there's fear, all of those things feed into it, and you just want to crawl up into a little ball and sort of disappear. So something like this, without revealing all of the qualitative stuff that you're about to come out with, was there a feeling as well that they felt more confident to be able to handle this, and that stigma and shame was removed?
That's a really good question. I can't remember offhand in terms of the qualitative themes, but my gut feeling is probably yes, because I think that just being in this, a lot of what we do is sort of normalize it in the groups. We talk about, the fact that this happens in the brain, and that for 1 in 10 women, it's really significant. And we do talk about how to address that in work. And I think absolutely, it's really hard, isn't it? Because we know that the menopause action plans are coming in next year, but some of our research is really trying to understand, will people actually, if cognition's mentioned in there, and if it talks about things like, if you've got brain fog, tell your manager and we can make reasonable adjustments, would people actually feel that they could do that? Is it just embarrassing? Because, and I know from my own experience that I didn't really want to tell people, including my manager and others, that I was experiencing brain fog, because maybe they won't invite me to be part of projects, and maybe they won't trust my judgment and things like that. So it is really hard, and I think we really need to reduce that stigma and shame. The other thing that came out from one of our studies was we looked at ethnicity in the workplace, and we found that non-white groups, so women who are Black and Asian participants, were much less likely to report menopause symptoms generally. We didn't focus specifically on brain fog, but that the stigma was greater, and maybe they were more concerned about the impact. So we need to be really sensitive to these conversations.
And plus, there's a whole bunch of cultural taboo that goes with all of those sorts of things as well. And just generally, not being able to discuss them, and it's your lot in life to put up with this kind of stuff. There's a lot of sort of cultural things that sort of need to be broken down as well in those kinds of areas, which is a great shame. But we're all working towards that, which is a good thing. And now, speaking of brain fog, it just went into my that's right. It's come back to me again now. It's interesting actually, because in Washington, in the States, there has been a mandate now that they have to address menopause in the workplace. And there's been a little bit of a backlash from a number of people in the menopause space saying, well, hang on a second, it doesn't make it easier for people to get HRT. But as you've said, and as I can personally demonstrate, being on HRT is not the golden bullet. So in terms of the people digging down into what you did find in the small group, did you find that those who had HRT and those who didn't, did both of them get the same benefit, or was there any difference between the groups? Was there a greater
That's
benefit?
a really good question. We didn't do a subgroup analysis just because the numbers were so small. So you're not really meant to, when you do a feasibility study, you're not meant to make very much of the outcome measures. It's really looking at feasibility. I mean, so I think we'd need to do a much bigger trial to understand that. It's a really, really important question. But I don't think we just wouldn't have what we call statistical power to pick anything up on that. But I mean, I suppose what it did show about HRT is that, as I said before, there's still very much a need for additional support. And actually, we've done another study, which is going to be published in a couple of weeks' time, hopefully, on something called compassion focused therapy for low mood in menopause. We did a feasibility trial on that, and 83% of that sample were on HRT, but everyone in that trial was above the clinical threshold for anxiety or depression or both. So, and we're saying we really need additional support to support our low mood. So, as you say, for many it's fantastic, but there are lots of people that need that additional support.
Absolutely. I mean, we've done, even our sexual health study showed, all of these sort of symptoms, including low mood and anxiety, when you go through and ask all of the symptoms they've got, the low mood, the insomnia, the anxiety, and the brain fog especially, all continued. And some of the women in that were 500 or so of them were up to in their 80s, and they were still having those symptoms. And
yes,
many
I think, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that's sort of an important consideration is that we know that perimenopause is when the hormones fluctuate, but sometimes we can get into very negative cycles. And even when the hormones calm down, or we're on HRT or we're off HRT, but we don't have the hormonal impact, you can get yourself into a bit of a rut with some of these kind of brain and psychological symptoms. So if you've lost confidence, or you're very anxious about something happening, sometimes it's quite hard to get out of that. And I think that's partly why these symptoms can just go on and on, that people have got into these negative patterns. So I think sleep's a really good example. The impact of the hormones on sleep, we know, is huge, and that's what causes often night sweats and causes people to wake up. And sometimes that can go because you're on HRT or because you're post-menopause and you're not having that, but you're in a negative cycle at that point. You've got into this habit of waking up in the night and then convincing yourself you're never going to get back to sleep, and sort of being hypervigilant and overthinking and having these negative patterns. So it's so much more complex than just the hormones, which is why these psychological techniques are so important.
And you're just not going to function well the next day when you have spent 3 hours looking at the ceiling going, my God, I'm going to lose my job because I was awake for half of the night.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it is a difficult one. In terms of what happens next, now, full disclosure here, of course, the Menopause Research and Education Fund is supporting you, and you are our first research project that we have on our site for crowdfunding. So what we are hoping is, if you are listening to this and you would like to put some money directly towards Aimee's next large study, please do so. Or if you are a corporate person with a corporate background, please go to your company and say, this is going to be amazing for us because it's going to help keep our workforce at work. So
yes,
what is your next step? What do you hope to get out of it? How big, and what do you need?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we think is that this could be a brilliant intervention in the workplace. As you say, brain fog, 1 in 10 women we know leave work around the age of 50 permanently, and 1 in 4 reduce their hours, and the economic costs are huge. I haven't got the figure off the top of my head. I think it's $128 billion of lost productivity due to menopause. That's US dollars globally, but it's huge. And so people don't take, and also people are less likely to take promotions and things like that. So the Fawcett Society report in 2022 revealed a lot of those figures. And what we do know about brain fog is that if you give people the right support, they can stay doing what they want. What we think is that women just have to work extra hard to overcome these symptoms, and then they're more likely to get burnt out and stressed. So we think giving people this kind of support in the workplace could be revolutionary. And what we are looking for, well, it could be philanthropists, individuals. We're also thinking for corporate partners, this is something that they could pledge a certain amount towards the research, and we could actually run the trial in their companies. So what we need to do is a trial of about 200 women where we test out CST Meno. So if we've got corporate partners, they can be partners in terms of our recruitment as well. And what we hope is that by doing that, they will, to donate to the study, they'll donate to you, the charity. So it's a form of charitable giving, but that will be fantastic in terms of publicity. We'll be able to name them on our publications and reports. So excellent for things like DEI and corporate responsibility, as well as just helping the women in their workforce. We're looking for £400,000 in total, which probably sounds for a clinical trial. It's very cheap, and the reason it's very cheap is because it will be a charitable grant, so it will become via you. If we were doing it without charity, it would be about £1 million. So, and the other thing that we'll be doing within that is looking at cost effectiveness, as I mentioned before. Does this mean that people are less likely to take days off sick? Are they more likely to be productive in their work when they have access to this kind of support compared to those who don't?
Yeah, I think it's unbelievably amazing. I think it offers an incredibly huge opportunity for everybody, and if it can take that stress and anxiety away and give you more confidence and make you get through it, then it just seems like an absolute no-brainer to me. Absolute no-brainer. Marie over here is asking, is there any positive from brain fog in our lives? Is there something that happens to our brains that is a positive? I would say my little positive is whenever a thought comes back to me, I think, oh yay, it came back.
It's still there.
All positive, yeah. But is there anything that you can think of that is
I don't know if I'd say anything positive from brain fog, although apart from the fact that it's usually temporary. But I suppose I always reference Sarah McKay, who's a neuroscientist in Sydney. You may have met her, and she wrote a book called The Women's Brain, and she talks about two kind of superpowers that we have in midlife. So she talks about cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to be flexible and not be too stuck in a rut and to think around the box. And she also talks about crystallized intelligence, which is kind of wisdom and stuff that you've learned over time, and how we are as midlife women, we're at our peak of both. So we've got lots more. Compared to young people, we've got a lot more wisdom, and compared to older people, we're often more flexible in the way that our brains work. So the midlife brain doesn't have to be a bad thing. And and as I said, only 1 in 10 women we think really struggle with brain fog, even though 86% report it in some way. So it's not like everyone is totally affected by it. And I do think the positive take-home message is that it is something that's largely subjective and that we can overcome with the right support.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I mean, we hear a lot about the sort of, the estrogen receptors on the brain and the brain, screaming out for this, and the way it changes, perimenopause changes the energy usage in the brain. But we adapt, don't we? I mean, this is the nice thing about brains. Coming back to what Sarah was saying, in the way, the brain is a plastic thing. It does adapt to stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we adapt to, stroke and all sorts of brain damage. I think the reason it goes into flux in perimenopause is that it's moving all the time. It tends to adapt and calm down a little bit more post-menopause because the hormones aren't fluctuating. But yes, we adapt in terms of our lifestyle. I mean, my brain fog is still there, absolutely. But I keep lots of notes. I joke about it. I try not to have things first thing in the morning when I forget my words. And if I do, I just tell people I'm going to forget my words. and they laugh, hopefully genuinely, rather than thinking I'm completely mad. And we just find ways around it. But so yes, I think we are more resilient than we think.
That's interesting. You find it worse in the morning, yeah?
Yeah, always. But I'm not a morning person. In fairness, I'm anyone who knows me will, I drag myself out of bed at 10:15 on a weekend. I'm that kind of person, so that might be why.
Yes, I've got to say I'm not a great fan of mornings. I would literally rather work through the night than get up early. It's
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not a morning person. The I know I can't remember what I was going to say, but I think it is a I think you're really onto something. I think that this is an amazing thing, and I hope that people do put their hands into their pockets and actually put something towards it, because I think it's a great shame if they don't. Do you think in the future that is this something, like we have the apps that now for like Sleepio and things like that? Does it always in the future, do you think, if you're looking into the crystal ball, you get the money you want, and it turns out to be absolutely fantastic, which I'm sure it will, is it something that people could do for themselves? Do they have to have it delivered? Because there's always difficulty finding A, money to do something, and B, somebody to deliver something. Is it something that they can do themselves? And are there also, because I love double-barrel questions, are there also any tips that you can give people until you have your proof in the pudding that will help them get through now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we want to just check that we can get a protocol that works and that's effective. But I think rolling it out longer term, absolutely. We need something that can be done in groups. Many people actually respond better if they've got something facilitated and they're in a group, but others respond better doing things themselves and being self-directed and doing it in their own time, in their own space. So we will definitely develop a self-directed version of CST Meno, probably through an app. I've got various people already who are very keen on doing that. In the meantime, there's various things I've written. If people follow me on LinkedIn and scroll down, we've written various papers with tips on things that people could be doing. But I think things like, I'm just thinking, being realistic about things, not trying to multitask too much, because actually what we know about multitasking is that we often think we're doing two things at the same time, but actually we're not. We're shifting, and that's really, really hard for the brain when it's having these kind of problems. So, when you're really trying to do something, switch your email notifications off, switch your phone notifications off, just try and do one thing at a time. There are lots of things in CST Meno about using mental imagery. Or so if you're trying to remember a story or remembering someone's name, just thinking of some mental association. So the example I have in one of my papers is that you meet someone called Cara and you think, how am I going to remember the name Cara? You visualize that person sitting in a car and that helps you remember the name. So those kind of things. So I think there's various things that people can do. But yes, hopefully this will be available in various shapes and forms in the next few years. The sooner we can get funding, the better. The other plug, I guess, is that when one gives to charity, normally you never know where it's going to go. But I think the beauty of this particular project is that anyone who donates this project will know exactly what we're doing with it, and we can give them feedback and reports and things like that.
Yep, absolutely. It will go directly into its own little pot, and then blossom into something absolutely amazing, I hope. Brilliant. Is there anything else that we need to say? Do you think we've covered brain fog?
I think we've covered brain fog. I don't know if there's any more questions from.
Not looking like it at the moment, but if there is, they can always throw them my way and I can throw them at you.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for having me.
Yay. And all right, I shall end this here now. And thank you. And if people do want to get involved in this, you can go to the Menopause Research and Education Fund website, mref.uk, and there's a thing there saying research projects. Click on that, and then it goes through to your project, and people can read more about it and donate directly towards it. So let's hope that somebody does. That would be nice. Yay.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.